Have you ever wondered what it feels like to pour expensive champagne in your own home, smiling obediently while your in-laws announce they will allow you to stay as long as you pay them rent? They thought they held all the cards, manipulating a naive wife to squeeze out every single dollar. What they did not know was that every extortion bill they smugly printed was a life sentence I was quietly signing. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Natalie Simpson. I am 32 years old, and for the past 10 years, I have poured every ounce of my soul into my career, working my way up to become the chief engineer at the highly demanding Aetheris Marine Innovations was not a gentle journey. It was built on endless overtime, skipping meals, and surviving on adrenaline and dark coffee. When the extreme pressure finally yielded a massive financial reward, I craved a sanctuary. I found it in a breathtaking coastal estate in Monterey, California. The sprawling glass walls overlooked the crashing ocean, providing a profound sense of peace. But I am an engineer. I calculate risks for a living to protect my hard-earned sanctuary from any unforeseen marital complications. I purchased the property in absolute secrecy. It was registered under a limited liability company, a legal entity of which I was the sole and undisputed owner. My husband, Julian, lived in blissful ignorance. I had fed him a perfectly crafted, watertight lie. I told him the sweeping estate was owned by a local coastal landscape conservation fund, and because my engineering firm collaborated with them, I had secured a heavily discounted lease for employees. For a long time, the illusion held perfectly. We lived quietly, and the rhythmic sound of the ocean waves masked any subtle, underlying disconnect in our marriage. Then, the storm arrived. Not from the turbulent Pacific Ocean, but straight down the coastal highway. Marcus and Eleanor, my fiercely proud parents-in-law, along with Julian's younger sister, Chloe, went completely bankrupt. Through a series of terrible investments and reckless spending, they lost their lavish apartment in San Francisco, with nowhere else to go. They arrived at my doorstep carrying heavy luggage and a tragic sob story. They pleaded for a temporary stay, just a few short months to regain their financial footing. They promised, the ocean breeze blowing through my living room, once crisp and deeply invigorating, suddenly felt thick, heavy, and undeniably suffocating. A temporary shelter rapidly mutated into a hostile, parasitic occupation. I would return home, physically and mentally drained from grueling engineering shifts, only to find my sanctuary thoroughly desecrated. Eleanor, maintaining the terrifying audacity of a woman who still believed she held a limitless platinum credit card, decided my carefully curated minimalist decor was entirely too drab. Without asking, she threw away two of my most expensive custom-commissioned art pieces. When I confronted her, she simply waved her hand dismissively, stating she had replaced them with superior ceramic vases she found at a local boutique. Meanwhile, Chloe treated my multi-million-dollar home like her personal, rent-free production studio. She was an aspiring social media influencer. Though delusional parasite would be a far more accurate description, every corner of my pristine house was hijacked as the backdrop for her daily broadcasts. I would find her posing seductively by my private infinity pool, holding crystal glasses filled with my most expensive vintage wine. She bragged endlessly to her followers about her incredible, luxurious new lifestyle, painting herself as a wealthy coastal elite. She conveniently forgot to mention she was a penniless squatter living off her working sister-in-law. The air inside the house grew heavier with each passing week, slowly compressing my lungs. However, the absolute pinnacle of their audacity did not stem from discarded artwork or obnoxious internet videos. It materialized on a bleak Tuesday evening. I was sitting silently at the dark oak dining table when Marcus swaggered into the room. He confidently slid a crisp, white envelope across the polished wood toward me. Inside lay a neatly typed document, complete with a highly convincing, fabricated corporate letterhead. He puffed his chest out, a sickeningly smug grin plastered across his aging face. I had a very long and productive chat with the regional directors of the Coastal Landscape Conservation Fund, Marcus declared, adjusting the collar of his shirt as if he were a commanding executive. They were incredibly impressed with my extensive background in high-end real estate. So impressed, in fact, that they have officially appointed me as the primary property manager for this entire estate, effective immediately. Is that so? I replied, keeping my voice perfectly flat, though my heart pounded aggressively against my ribs. Yes, he said, forcefully tapping the fraudulent document with his index finger. And as the newly appointed manager, I have a strict duty to enforce their updated corporate policies. The rent has gone up. Natalie, you and Julian now owe $4,000 every single month as a mandatory maintenance fee. If you cannot pay the full amount on time, I will have absolutely no choice but to initiate an eviction process. We have to keep this massive property running smoothly. After all, the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the situation washed over me like freezing water. Here stood a completely bankrupt man, living in my house entirely for free, boldly attempting to extort $4,000 from me on behalf of a phantom conservation fund. A normal person would have erupted in a blinding rage. A normal person would have marched to a hidden safe, slammed the official property deed onto the table, and thrown the entire parasitic family out into the cold night air. But as I stared deeply into Marcus's greedy, triumphant eyes, a chilling realization settled heavily in my stomach. This was not merely the desperate act of a broke old man. This was meticulously calculated. The fabricated document was far too neat, the lie incredibly bold and polished. There was something much darker and far more sinister lurking beneath his arrogant facade. Instead of exploding, I carefully folded the fake eviction notice and slipped it back into the white envelope. I looked up at my father-in-law and offered him a tight, obedient, and utterly submissive smile. I understand completely, Marcus, I said softly. I will make sure to transfer the $4,000 to you by the end of the week. I sat perfectly still and watched him beam with intoxicating triumph, completely unaware that he had just gleefully accepted the shovel he would use to dig his own grave. I chose absolute silence. I chose the illusion of obedience, and hiding in the deep shadows of my own home, I quietly initiated a ruthless, methodical investigation into the very family I had married into. I initiated the first wire transfer on a Friday morning. I sat at my desk, watching the blue progress bar on my banking application fill the screen, sending exactly $4,000 into a newly opened checking account Marcus had mandated. But I did not simply send the money blindly. In the transaction memo line, I deliberately typed the words, January rent. It was a tiny, seemingly insignificant digital breadcrumb. In reality, it was the foundational brick of an ironclad case for criminal extortion. They truly believed they were bullying a tired, docile engineer. They did not realize they were creating a pristine, undeniable paper trail that no defense attorney could ever erase. Their arrogance swelled like a malignant tumor in my home. By the second week of the month, the boundaries of my own property began to shrink around me. I came downstairs one evening after a grueling 14-hour shift, hoping to sit by the pool and breathe in the salty ocean air to clear my mind. Eleanor stood firmly in the doorway leading to the terrace, her arms crossed tight against her chest, effectively blocking my path. I am sorry, Natalie, she declared, her tone dripping with a sickening, manufactured sympathy. We are keeping the terrace and the pool area strictly as a private family hosting zone from now on. Chloe needs a closed set for her brand partnerships, and Marcus and I need a quiet, dignified space to entertain potential business associates. I am sure you understand the need for boundaries. You can use the small balcony off the guest room if you need some air. I looked past her shoulder at the shimmering blue water of my infinity pool, the pool I had paid for with my own blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. Of course, Eleanor, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly hollow. I would not want to intrude on your family's space. I retreated upstairs to my home office and securely locked the heavy oak door. It was time to open my eyes and see exactly what was happening in the shadows of my own house. Long before I even met Julian, back when this house was just a massive architectural blueprint, I had insisted on installing a state-of-the-art, covert security system. High-definition microcameras were seamlessly embedded in the smoke detectors, the air purification vents, and the crown molding of every main room. Julian did not possess the fundamental technical literacy to configure a standard internet router, let alone detect military-grade surveillance nodes operating on a hidden, encrypted frequency. I booted up my secure server and brought the entire house online. The grid illuminated my dual monitors. I could see everything. It did not take long to uncover exactly why Marcus needed the terrace for his so-called business associates. Just 3 days later, while I was reviewing schematics at Aetheris Marine Innovations, my phone buzzed with a high-priority motion alert from the main living room camera. I immediately opened the live feed. Marcus was pacing confidently across my imported Persian rugs. He was not alone. He was actively guiding 3 men in sharp, tailored suits through the open space. These men were clearly not casual friends. They were meticulously inspecting the structural integrity of the retaining walls, examining the vaulted ceiling beams, and taking highly detailed photographs of the panoramic ocean view from the restricted terrace. I zoomed in on the audio feed. Turning the volume up to maximum, Marcus, a man who had his real estate brokerage license permanently revoked exactly 10 years ago for severely unethical financial practices, was delivering a highly rehearsed pitch. He was pointing out the precise property lines, discussing zoning permits, and boasting about the structural foundations. He was treating my home like an active, off-market luxury listing. My blood turned to absolute ice, but my mind sharpened into a lethal blade. This was no longer just a pathetic scheme to siphon a few $1,000s a month for pocket change. They were attempting something massive, something incredibly dangerous. The greed mutated faster than I could have ever anticipated. On the first day of February, Eleanor cornered me in the modern kitchen. She poured herself a fresh cup of my expensive artisan coffee and sighed dramatically, leaning against the marble counter. "Natalie, Marcus and I have been crunching the numbers late into the night," she began, refusing to make direct eye contact with me. "The property taxes on a coastal estate of this magnitude are absolutely astronomical. The Conservation Fund simply cannot subsidize the maintenance costs anymore. They are threatening to terminate the lease. So, starting this very month, the rent is increasing to $6,000. She paused, taking a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee. "We know things are tight for you. Julian told us about your recent performance reviews at work. Perhaps you should ask your boss for more overtime shifts. It is only fair that you share the family burden, considering we are doing all the heavy lifting to keep a roof over your head and keep this house secured." $6,000. I forced my shoulders to slump heavily forward. I lowered my gaze directly to the floor, perfectly projecting the image of a completely defeated, financially broken woman who had lost all hope. "I will figure it out, Eleanor," I whispered, my voice trembling with practiced exhaustion. "I can take the late-night shifts at the engineering lab. I will get the money." "That is the spirit," she smiled brightly, stepping forward and patting my arm as if I were a foolish, obedient dog. I walked away, my head bowed low in submission, but inside my mind, I was meticulously calculating the statutory limits of the California Penal Code. Every single payment I dutifully submitted pushed the total stolen amount higher and higher. $4,000, then $10,000, then $16,000. I was not just paying their ridiculous demands. I was purposely feeding their bottomless greed, patiently waiting for the sum to effortlessly cross the strict legal threshold for felony grand theft and first-degree extortion. The heavier their pockets grew with my money, the longer and more severe their inevitable prison sentences would become. They truly thought they had backed a weak woman into a corner. They did not know I was the one quietly locking the door behind them, throwing away the key. Through all the suffocating madness of Marcus and Eleanor occupying my home, I had clung to one fragile, desperate rationalization. I told myself Julian was simply a coward. He was a weak, easily manipulated son who could not stand up to his overbearing parents. I watched him sit quietly at the dinner table, chewing his food in silence while his father barked orders and his mother demanded more of my money. I pitied him. I genuinely believed he was just collateral damage in their arrogant invasion. I thought we were victims together, trapped in a temporary nightmare that I would eventually have to fix for both of us. That pathetic illusion shattered into a million jagged pieces on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Julian had left the house to attend what he called a mandatory networking brunch in the city. I was in the garage, searching for a specific torque wrench in the storage cabinets near his pristine, terribly expensive set of golf clubs. As I moved the heavy leather golf bag to reach the toolbox, the bag tipped over, spilling its contents across the cold concrete floor. I knelt to gather the scattered golf balls and tees. When I reached into the deep zippered side pocket to replace a handful of items, my fingers brushed against something hard and metallic that definitely did not belong there. I pulled it out. It was a heavy, encrypted digital hardware wallet, the kind specifically designed for storing cryptocurrency completely off the grid. Beneath it, shoved forcefully to the very bottom of the narrow pocket, was a thick, crumpled stack of papers wrapped tightly in thick rubber bands. My breathing slowed to a deliberate, shallow rhythm. I carried the hardware wallet and the bundle of papers directly up to my secure home office and locked the door. I carefully unrolled the papers. They were not official bank statements. They were crude, horrifyingly explicit printouts of digital ledgers mixed with terrifying, physical threats. The documents detailed a catastrophic series of highly leveraged, completely failed cryptocurrency trades. But the catastrophic part was not just the losses, it was the source of the capital. Julian had not borrowed from a legitimate financial institution. He had taken a massive, unsecured line of credit from an underground syndicate, a ruthless network of black market lenders who did not negotiate late fees. The final balance printed at the bottom of the most recent page made my stomach violently churn. My husband, the man who claimed he could not afford to take me to a nice restaurant for our anniversary, owed exactly $300,000 to men who broke bones for a living. The margins of the papers were filled with handwritten notes detailing my daily schedule, my license plate number, and the exact times I left for the engineering lab. They were threatening his life, and he was using my predictable routine as a bargaining chip to buy himself more time. A sickening wave of nausea washed over me, but it was immediately swallowed by a dark, consuming need for the absolute truth. I connected his encrypted hardware wallet to my isolated testing server. Bypassing his pathetically simple 4-digit security PIN took my decryption software less than 45 seconds. But I did not just find empty crypto wallets. I found an entire hidden directory of backed-up text messages synced from his mobile device. I opened the chat log between Julian and his mother, Eleanor. The timestamp stretched back to 3 weeks before they lost their San Francisco apartment. I scrolled through the glowing text on my monitor, and with every sentence I read, the woman I used to be was violently murdered. Julian was not the victim. Julian was the architect. It was his idea. He had meticulously orchestrated the entire home invasion. He knew his parents were facing eviction, and he saw it as the perfect, flawless cover story. He instructed them to move in, knowing I would be too polite and exhausted to refuse a family in crisis. He fed his father the idea of the fake property management document. He told them exactly how much to extort from me, calculating my exact monthly take-home pay from Atheris Marine Innovations down to the last cent. The extortion money I was transferring to Marcus was not going toward fake property taxes. It was being funneled directly into Julian's hidden digital wallets to slowly chip away at his $300,000 death warrant. Then, I found the exact message that froze the blood in my veins. Eleanor had texted him, expressing a brief moment of hesitation, worrying that I might snap under the pressure and pack my bags. Julian's response was typed with casual, chilling cruelty. "Do not worry about her," he wrote. "She is a blind money printer for me. Just keep forcing her to pay. She will never dare to leave. She is too obsessed with her career and too deeply in love with the idea of a perfect marriage to ever walk away, squeeze every dollar out of her. I sat perfectly still in the sterile glow of my dual monitors. The silence in my office was absolute. A normal wife might have collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, mourning the devastating death of her marriage. A normal wife might have screamed, throwing glass and demanding a divorce. I did none of those things. The betrayal was so profound, so utterly absolute, that it completely bypassed sorrow and immediately forged itself into something cold, heavy, and unbreakable. The love I felt for Julian evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a hollow, glacial void. My heart did not break. It crystallized into pure, unforgiving ice. He did not see me as a human being. He saw me as a machine, a naive financial resource to be exploited and discarded. I decided right then, staring at his pathetic, arrogant words, that I would not just leave him, I was going to utterly dismantle him. I was going to completely eradicate his future and the future of the greedy parasites he called a family. I turned back to my keyboard, my fingers flying across the keys with lethal precision. My first strike was completely silent. I logged into our joint banking portal. With a few rapid commands, I systematically drained every single joint savings account we shared. Leaving a perfectly round balance of $0.00. I digitally removed his authorization access from all shared credit lines, flagging his secondary cards as stolen to trigger an immediate, irreversible freeze. Next, I accessed my corporate compensation portal. I diverted my upcoming annual stock bonuses, my deferred executive compensation, and the entirety of my personal liquid assets into a newly established, high-security blind trust account. I layered the trust with complex legal barricades that no divorce attorney or black market debt collector could ever hope to penetrate. By the time Julian returned home that evening, greeting me with a soft, deceitful kiss on my forehead, he was already financially dead. I smiled back at him, my eyes devoid of any warmth, and gently straightened the collar of his shirt. He had absolutely no idea that the blind money printer he so arrogantly mocked had just cut his final lifeline, leaving him to drown in a terrifying ocean of his own making. The extortion was just a pathetic band-aid. $300,000 of violent syndicate debt could not be paid off with $6,000 a month. The mathematical equations simply did not align. Julian was desperate, and desperate men bleeding out in shark-infested waters did not play the long game. There was a missing puzzle piece, a much larger, catastrophic endgame lurking in the shadows. At 2 o'clock in the morning, while the entire house slept under the heavy rhythm of the crashing ocean waves, I slipped out of my bedroom. I moved silently down the sweeping staircase toward the living areas. Marcus, ever the arrogant fool, had left his sleek silver laptop resting on the kitchen island. He assumed his physical environment was perfectly secure. He was dead wrong. I plugged a custom decryption drive into the side of his machine. Bypassing his lock screen took me exactly 12 seconds. I mirrored his entire hard drive, hunting for digital anomalies, buried deep within a hidden partition. I found a heavily encrypted file archive. I pulled the data, completely wiped my digital footprint from his system, and retreated to the absolute safety of my locked office. Cracking Marcus's encryption took my workstation slightly over 2 hours. When the progress bar finally vanished and the folders unpacked across my dual monitors, the sheer scale of their audacity hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Marcus had not just faked a simple property management letter, he had engaged the services of a highly sophisticated, professional forgery ring operating out of the dark web. The decrypted folder contained high-resolution scans of a masterfully counterfeited power of attorney, complete with forged state notary seals. Next to it was an entirely fabricated deed of transfer. The fake documents officially signed the total management and usage rights of my coastal estate over to Julian. But Julian was not the final destination. He was just the disposable bridge. I opened a chain of encrypted emails between Marcus and a shadow broker. They were actively negotiating the illicit sale of those property rights to a notorious real estate money launderer. This buyer was a man heavily monitored by federal agencies, known for washing dirty syndicate money through luxury properties across the West Coast. The agreed purchase price was $3 million, all in untraceable, physical cash. The pieces of their lethal puzzle snapped together with terrifying clarity. I reviewed the logistics timeline attached to the emails. The physical exchange of the forged deed and the $3 million in cash was scheduled to take place inside my own home in exactly 14 days. They needed a flawless cover to bring a known criminal and his armed associates into an affluent, highly monitored neighborhood without triggering suspicion. They found it in Chloe. Her pathetic, self-indulgent internet presence was finally serving a dark purpose. For weeks, Chloe had been loudly advertising a massive, exclusive lifestyle brand launch party to her followers. I had dismissed it as another delusional attempt at internet fame. I was completely wrong. The loud music, the chaotic influx of wealthy guests, the catering vans, it was all a meticulously designed smokescreen. The money launderer and his crew would walk right through my front door disguised as VIP investors. I dug deeper into the final folder and found the exit strategy. Marcus had already secured 4 one-way, first-class plane tickets to a remote island nation with 0 extradition treaties with the United States. The flight was scheduled to depart at 6 o'clock in the morning, mere hours after the party ended. Their plan was a masterpiece of absolute sociopathy. They would take the $3 million in cash and vanish across the ocean before the sun even rose. When the cartel money launderer eventually discovered the property deed was completely worthless, Marcus and Julian would be thousands of miles away. The buyer would return to this house seeking violent retribution, and who would be left behind? Sleeping alone in the master bedroom, completely oblivious to the danger. Me? They were not just planning to steal from me. They were leaving me as the sacrificial lamb to face the wrath of a betrayed money launderer, while simultaneously leaving me exposed to the underground syndicate demanding the $300,000 Julian originally owed. It was a guaranteed death sentence. A freezing electric current of pure adrenaline surged through my veins. A few hours ago, my only goal was to lock them out and watch them rot in a local jail for petty extortion. Now, the rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. Simply kicking them out onto the street was no longer an option. Eviction was a mercy they absolutely did not deserve. If I stopped them now, they would just scatter like roaches, eventually finding another victim, another host to drain. I sat back in my chair, staring at the digital blueprints of their imminent escape. The fear that should have paralyzed me was completely absent, replaced by a ruthless, hyper-focused clarity. I did not want to stop the transaction. I wanted to actively facilitate it. I wanted them to feel the intoxicating rush of victory, to hold those briefcases of cash, to taste their ultimate triumph. I would let them build their perfect, illicit transaction right in the middle of my living room, and right at the very moment they thought they had won. I would turn my beautiful coastal sanctuary into a reinforced steel cage from which none of them would ever escape. I did not go to the engineering lab the morning after I uncovered their catastrophic escape plan. Instead, I drove straight to the heavily fortified downtown offices of my private legal counsel, sitting across the massive mahogany desk from my attorney. I did not just present a simple complaint. I laid out a comprehensive, heavily documented dossier of major federal crimes. We did not call the local police department. Local police handled domestic disputes and noise complaints. We contacted a highly specialized federal financial crime investigation task force. I sat in a secure conference room and handed over the encrypted hard drive containing the forged property deeds, the detailed banking records of the extortion transfers, the intercepted emails with the cartel shadow broker, and the audio logs of Marcus parading around my property. The lead federal investigator, a sharp, unsmiling woman in a dark gray suit, reviewed the evidence in absolute silence for 45 minutes. When she finally looked up from the documents, her eyes held a cold, predatory glint. The trap was officially sanctioned by the federal government. I just had to deliver the targets directly into the kill zone. Returning to the estate, the atmosphere was thick with frantic, arrogant energy. The lifestyle brand launch party was only 48 hours away, and their delusions of grandeur had reached a fever pitch. I walked through the massive front doors to find Eleanor standing in the grand foyer, her hands planted firmly on her hips, aggressively directing a crew of delivery workers. "Ah, Natalie, good," Eleanor barked, not even bothering to offer a polite greeting. "We have a critical logistical issue. Chloe needs a private, luxurious space to finalize brand partnerships with her VIP investors during the party. The master suite is the only room with the correct aesthetic and a private oceanfront balcony." She paused, letting the silence stretch, fully expecting me to fight back. When I said nothing, she pushed harder. "We need you to clear your things out of the master bedroom immediately," she demanded, her chin raised in defiance. "You can take the storage room down in the basement for the next few days. It is just temporary. Of course, we all have to make minor sacrifices for the family." The basement storage room was a damp, windowless concrete box meant for holiday decorations and spare architectural tiles. It was entirely unfit for human habitation. It was the ultimate, degrading insult. A month ago, this demand would have sparked a screaming match that would have echoed down the entire coastline. Today, it was exactly what I needed. Being out of the way meant I could monitor the entire security grid in absolute darkness, without any interruption. "I understand completely, Eleanor," I said, offering a soft, brilliantly hollow smile. "I will pack a small bag and head downstairs right away. Whatever helps the family succeed." She looked visibly disappointed that I did not cry or beg, but her overwhelming greed quickly overrode her confusion. She waved me away dismissively, already turning her back to yell at the workers to bring up new, impossibly expensive bedding. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in watching absolute fools spend money they did not actually have. Chloe had taken my final $6,000 rent payment and funneled it entirely into her pathetic illusion of wealth. She rented a bright red, $500,000 sports car and parked it diagonally across my pristine driveway just for photographs. She hired a crew to roll out a literal red velvet carpet over the front stone steps. On the late afternoon of the party, the house was swarming with private caterers, bartenders, and a small army of event photographers. I emerged from the basement to grab a bottle of water from the kitchen. Chloe was sitting in the center of the living room, surrounded by 3 professional makeup artists fussing over her hair and face. She caught my reflection in the large mirror and laughed aloud. "Oh, Natalie, are you really wearing those baggy sweatpants tonight? The catering staff is dressed better than you. Do me a massive favor and stay hidden down in the basement once the guests actually arrive. I cannot have my high net worth investors thinking we employ homeless people." The makeup artists giggled nervously, keeping their eyes cast downward. I looked directly at Chloe, taking in the heavy contouring and the glittering, rented jewelry clinging tightly to her neck. "Have a wonderful night, Chloe," I replied smoothly, my voice dangerously calm. "I am absolutely sure it will be unforgettable." As evening approached, the sky over the Pacific Ocean bruised into shades of deep purple and black. I was standing near the edge of the dimly lit hallway when Julian approached me. He was dressed in a sharp-tailored black tuxedo that he definitely could not afford. He looked handsome, completely polished, and utterly lethal. He stepped close, wrapping his arms securely around my shoulders and pulling me into a tight embrace. "I know things have been incredibly stressful lately, honey," he whispered, pressing a soft, deceptive kiss against my temple. "But I promise you, after tonight, everything is going to change. We are going to have a completely fresh start." I leaned into his chest, resting my cheek against his tailored jacket. Through the thin fabric, I could perfectly feel the stiff, rectangular bulge tucked securely inside his inner breast pocket. The 4 one-way, first-class plane tickets, the absolute Judas kiss. He was holding me in his arms while actively planning to leave me to be slaughtered by a money laundering cartel before breakfast. "I know, Julian," I whispered back, my voice completely devoid of any human emotion. "Everything changes tonight." He smiled warmly, patted my back with fake reassurance, and walked away to join his family of predators. At exactly 7 o'clock in the evening, the first luxury vehicles began to pull up the winding coastal road. The heavy bass of the electronic music vibrated down through the floorboards into my concrete room. The bait was officially in the water. It was time to pull the net tight. I sat on a single metal folding chair in the damp basement and opened my encrypted laptop. I bypassed the standard user interface and accessed the deep source code of the estate's smart grid. I initiated a total military-grade lockdown protocol. With a few rapid keystrokes, I permanently disabled the manual overrides on the massive steel entrance gates. I severed the external electronic connections to every single exterior lock, heavily reinforcing the deadbolts on the front doors, the terrace exits, and the garage bays. I completely isolated the network, ensuring absolutely no one could open a door or a gate without my direct, localized digital authorization. The loud music continued to thump rhythmically overhead. The arrogant laughter of the wealthy guests echoed down through the ventilation shafts. They were completely oblivious. My multi-million-dollar sanctuary was no longer a beautiful coastal home. It was a reinforced, impenetrable steel cage, and the monsters were finally locked inside. The heavy bass of the electronic music vibrated through the reinforced floorboards. But down in the damp basement, I was completely immune to the chaotic noise. I stood before a small, cracked mirror, leaning against a concrete wall, and slowly unzipped my canvas duffel bag. I had not packed old holiday decorations or spare sweaters when Eleanor banished me downstairs. I had packed my armor. I stripped off the oversized, pathetic sweatpants and pulled on a custom-tailored, deep emerald silk evening gown. The fabric draped perfectly over my frame, radiating an aura of absolute, undeniable authority. I clasped a diamond necklace around my throat, slid my feet into sharp, black stiletto heels, and smoothed my hair back into a flawless, severe style. For weeks, I had played the exhausted, defeated hostage in my own home. Tonight, the owner was officially returning to collect her debts. I walked up the dimly lit back staircase, my heels making zero sound on the plush runner, and slipped unnoticed into the deep shadows near the massive marble pillars of the grand living room. The scene unfolding before me was a grotesque masterpiece of stolen wealth. The sprawling space was packed with dozens of high society guests, clinking crystal glasses and laughing at hollow jokes. Chloe was pacing near the front of the room, posing obnoxiously in front of a massive projection screen that continuously looped her flashy, entirely meaningless lifestyle brand logo. But my eyes immediately locked onto a small, isolated group standing near the terrace doors. There stood Marcus and Julian, eagerly conversing with a severe-looking man in a slate-gray suit. The man was flanked by two massive, silent bodyguards. This was the cartel shadow broker. He was holding a sleek, silver aluminum briefcase. Inside that case sat exactly $3 million in untraceable cash. The final, fatal transaction was merely minutes away. Marcus enthusiastically tapped his champagne flute with a silver spoon, demanding the attention of the crowded room. The heavy music faded out, replaced by an expectant murmur. Marcus puffed out his chest, stepping confidently onto a small elevated platform. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed investors, and beloved friends," Marcus boomed into a wireless microphone, his voice dripping with unbearable arrogance. "Tonight, we are not merely launching Chloe's visionary new brand. We are celebrating the enduring strength of family legacy. When we acquired this magnificent, sprawling coastal estate, we knew it would serve as the ultimate foundation for our future, a foundation built on brilliant investments, sharp business acumen, and unwavering trust. Please, raise your glasses to our great estate and to the massive, highly lucrative partnerships being finalized right here, tonight." The crowd raised their glasses, murmuring polite agreements. Marcus beamed, looking directly at the cartel broker, silently signaling that the deed was ready to be signed. "That was a truly moving speech, Marcus," a voice echoed sharply through the room. The entire crowd froze. Heads whipped around, searching for the source. I stepped out from behind the massive marble pillar, the brilliant chandelier light catching the deep emerald silk of my gown. The murmurs instantly died. A profound, absolute silence swallowed the room. Chloe dropped her jaw, staring at me in absolute horror. Completely unable to comprehend how the ragged woman she banished to the basement was now commanding the attention of the entire room, Eleanor gasped, her face draining of all color. Julian stumbled backward, nearly spilling his drink on the cartel broker. "Natalie!" Julian choked out, his voice cracking violently. "What are you doing up here? You are supposed to be downstairs." I did not look at him. I kept my eyes locked on Marcus, maintaining a perfectly cold, predatory smile. I raised my right hand. Tucked between my fingers was the remote control for the master projection system. "I just wanted to add a few crucial visual aids to your brilliant presentation regarding the family legacy," I said clearly. I pressed the button. The massive screen behind Chloe instantly flickered. Her obnoxious pink logo vanished. In its place, projected in glowing, 10-foot-tall letters, was the original, highly classified deed of ownership for the estate. The name of the limited liability company was displayed at the very top, followed by the name of its sole proprietor, Natalie Simpson. Before anyone could even process the document, I pressed the button again. The screen split in half. On the left side was the authentic deed. On the right side were high-resolution scans of Marcus's counterfeit documents. I had meticulously highlighted the forged notary seals and the fake signatures in bright crimson red. "You see, ladies and gentlemen," I announced, projecting my voice effortlessly over the stunned silence. "My father-in-law is not a real estate magnate. He is a disgraced broker who lost his license 10 years ago, and my husband is not a brilliant investor. He is a desperate, pathetic coward, drowning in exactly $300,000 of syndicate debt." I pressed the button one final time. The screen flashed again, displaying the massive, undeniable screenshots of Julian's text messages to his mother. The words hung heavily over the entire room. "She is a blind money printer for me. Just keep forcing her to pay. She will never dare to leave." "This entire party," I continued, my voice sharp as broken glass, "is a meticulously designed smokescreen. They brought you all here to mask the illegal sale of my property to a known money laundering organization for $3 million in cash, while holding one-way tickets out of the country." The atmosphere in the room violently snapped. The cartel broker did not need to hear another word. He realized instantly that he had been completely exposed, dragged into a highly public space to purchase a worthless piece of paper. His face contorted in pure, lethal rage. He snapped his fingers. His two massive bodyguards immediately lunged forward, grabbing Marcus by the throat and violently shoving Julian against the glass terrace doors. "Where is my money?" the broker snarled, stepping directly into Marcus's terrified face. "You tried to steal $3 million from me." The illusion of the arrogant, commanding family completely shattered. Marcus began weeping instantly, begging for his life, but it was Julian who provided the most pathetic, satisfying display of absolute cowardice. Julian dropped to his knees, his hands clasped together, completely ignoring the fact that his father was being choked. "It was not me!" Julian screamed hysterically, tears streaming down his face as he sold his own blood relatives out without a single second of hesitation. It was their idea. My dad hired the forgers. He orchestrated the entire thing. I had absolutely nothing to do with this. Please, do not hurt me, Natalie. Tell them it was my parents." He crawled on the floor toward me, reaching out like a desperate, beaten animal. I looked down at him with absolute, freezing disgust. I did not move an inch. Suddenly, the massive glass windows overlooking the driveway exploded with blinding, piercing flashes of red and blue light. The wail of multiple high-powered sirens shattered the tense silence of the room. The steel front doors, which I had remotely unlocked just 30 seconds prior, burst wide open. "Federal agents, nobody move hands in the air." Over a dozen heavily armed federal agents and local police officers swarmed into the grand living room, their tactical flashlights cutting through the chaotic crowd. The cartel broker and his men instantly dropped their weapons. realizing they were completely trapped inside a fortified estate. The takedown was swift, brutal, and utterly magnificent to watch. Officers slammed Marcus and Eleanor against the marble dining table, harshly snapping heavy steel handcuffs around their wrists. The lead investigator loudly read Marcus his rights, explicitly listing federal real estate fraud, grand theft, and first-degree extortion. Eleanor wailed uncontrollably, her expensive makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. Julian did not even try to run. He remained curled on the floor, weeping violently as an agent hauled him up by the collar of his tuxedo, cuffing him tightly for conspiracy to commit money laundering and massive financial fraud. He looked back at me one last time, his eyes wide with pure terror and desperate pleading. I offered him nothing but a slow, chillingly satisfied smile. Across the room, Chloe was screaming like a complete lunatic as two female officers dragged her toward the exit. In her frantic struggle, she dropped her expensive smartphone. It hit the hard marble floor, the glass screen shattering into a spiderweb of cracks, abruptly ending the live internet broadcast of her spectacular, humiliating downfall. An hour later, the extravagant party guests had all been evacuated and aggressively questioned. The cartel members were secured in armored transport vehicles. I walked out onto the high wooden balcony attached to the master suite, holding a crystal glass of my most expensive, perfectly chilled vintage champagne. The cold, salty ocean breeze whipped through my hair. I leaned against the glass railing and watched the long, glowing line of police cruisers slowly wind their way down the dark coastal highway, taking the parasites away for a very, very long time. The heavy, suffocating weight that had crushed my chest for the past month was completely gone. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the champagne. The massive estate behind me was entirely empty. The sweeping halls were quiet, the air was clean, and the deep, rhythmic sound of the crashing waves returned to its rightful place. I smiled into the dark horizon. The house was finally, truly, and entirely mine. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Zoe Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.